As an Arabist, one of the areas of the Book of Mormon that fascinates me most is the Arabian portion in 1 Nephi. This is the narrative of Nephi and Lehi's travel down the coast of the Red Sea to the land Bountiful, and then from there to the New World. Now, it's very likely from the description in the Book of Mormon that that trip took place along the Arabian coast of the Red Sea, right along the coast. We now know that the trail that Lehi followed is an ancient one, and that the account given in 1 Nephi fits that ancient trail very, very nicely. It's the old frankincense trail. Frankincense was a substance that was in great demand in the Mediterranean basin. It's an aromatic substance that when burned gives off an aroma, as the name implies, that was used for a lot of purposes in the ancient Near East. When you think about the Jerusalem temple, for example, although it was a very holy place, the chief activity in that Jerusalem temple was slaughtering animals. If any of you have ever driven by a slaughterhouse, you know what that smells like. The smell can be very, very intense. And so the incense burned in the temple served a very practical function. It covered over the smell of the blood and the animal remains. But it also was seen as a symbol of prayers ascending up to God. And this was true not only in Jerusalem, but in temples throughout the Mediterranean area. Frankincense was very expensive, and the trade in it was very lucrative. And that trade goes back to ancient times. For example, King Solomon's negotiations with the Queen of Sheba almost certainly have to do with that trade route that Lehi followed some centuries later. So it goes back into very ancient times. Lehi followed the route, followed it very accurately from what we know about it, except toward the end, he reached a place that the Book of Mormon calls Nahum, and then he turned from there due east. My bet is that he was trying to avoid the other end of the frankincense trail, because he knew that Laman and Lemuel, his two recalcitrant sons, probably would try to ditch out at that point, and he wanted to avoid that area. So he travels due east, and he goes over then to an area that's relatively fertile, that they call the land of Bountiful. Now, do such places exist in Arabia? Critics of the Book of Mormon for years have said that Arabia is a wasteland. It's a desolate place with no plants or any kind of life, and so to call any area of Arabia bountiful is simply ridiculous. But in fact, such a place does exist. What's more interesting, I think, is that it exists in connection with another place, which still seems to bear the name Nahum, or something very related to it. There's a tribal confederation in Arabia called Nahum, and in the center of that tribal confederation, if you take the very center of that, you have a spot that fits in all regards the area known as Nahum in the Book of Mormon. There's even a burial ground there that goes back to ancient times. Remember, Ishmael died and was buried there in 1 Nephi. No excavations have been done there. No excavations may ever be done at that particular site, but it seems to fit. And if you go due east from that location, which was discovered by Warren and Michael Aston of Australia a few years back, if you go due east from that spot, you hit the one spot on the Arabian seacoast of what is today the Arabian Peninsula that fits all of the requirements for the land of Bountiful. It's spectacular. It even has a cliff from which Laman and Lemuel could very seriously have considered tossing Nephi when he simply got on their nerves. It has all the requirements. It has greenery, it has trees, it has fresh water, it has an excellent place to build a boat and then to push it into the sea. Now, how could Joseph Smith have known this? Eugene England has done a study of what Joseph Smith could have known about Arabia if he had been a great reader, if he had had access to those books in the Manchester Library, if they had even been there. In fact, everything he would have known, everything he would have learned from those books would have been wrong. So this is a bullseye. It's a direct hit at the center of the target on an area of the world that is virtually unknown even today, but was completely unknown to Westerners in Joseph Smith's time in the early 19th century. One of my favorite elements of the Book of Mormon, one of my favorite things to look at, is areas where Joseph Smith made a mistake, or a seeming mistake, that turns out to be right as we learn more about the ancient Near East. One of those areas is the name Alma. Now, everyone knows that the name Alma is a Latin woman's name. For example, General Colin Powell's wife is named Alma. We know that it's a Latin word. It means something like benevolent. You find it in phrases like alma mater, a term that's used for the school that somebody has graduated from. And so to have the name Alma show up as an ancient Semitic masculine personal name in the Book of Mormon clearly is a mistake. Joseph Smith simply blew it here, but in fact he didn't. Because we've now got evidence, unavailable to Joseph Smith, certainly unavailable from the Bible, that Alma is an ancient Semitic name for a man. In the Second Jewish Revolt against Rome under Bar Kokhba, things became so chaotic that people lost track of what their boundaries were to their property, and a delegation of men came to Simeon Bar Kokhba down by the Dead Sea in that revolution where it looked like Bar Kokhba had won, and they said, could you please reissue the land deeds, give us our boundary markers again for our land ownership around here. And he said yes, and he gave them deeds. One of the documents made out by Simeon Bar Kokhba, which was found by Yigal Yadin only in the 60s in excavations down by the Dead Sea, is a document made out to a man by the name of Alma, son of Judah. Now, in his fairly popular book on the excavations there, Yadin talks about that find, and he writes the name out, Alma, as A-L-M-A, which is close enough for me. Since then, we've found the name Alma in older documents from the Ebla find. We now have a history for that name outside of the Bible, unknown to the Bible, the history of that name as a name for a man of about 1,000 years in length in the ancient Near East. The only other place that it shows up is with two men in the Book of Mormon. Now, another seeming error that is connected with the Book of Alma is, in fact, a little different. I've actually seen a bumper sticker dealing with this one in Southern California, which must prove something. It was an anti-Mormon bumper sticker, and it said, "The Jesus of the Bible or the Jesus of the Mormons, born at Jerusalem or born in Bethlehem." Well, the Book of Mormon in Alma 7:10 predicts, this is before Christ, that Jesus Christ will be born at Jerusalem, which is the land of our fathers. Now, every school child knows that Jesus was not born in Jerusalem. He was born in Bethlehem. So isn't that simply a mistake, a dumb error? No, it's actually not, because documents have been found in recent years, only in this century, that speak of a place called Bethlehem, almost certainly Bethlehem, as a town of the land of Jerusalem. We know, therefore, that Bethlehem was considered to be a town within the land of Jerusalem, which is precisely right. Now, that doesn't occur in biblical usage, but it does occur outside of the Bible. More recently, a document from the Dead Sea Scrolls called 4Q385, also known as Pseudo-Jeremiah, in other words, with that name, it claims to go back to the very time of Lehi, describes the Jews as being taken captive from the land of Jerusalem, a phrase that doesn't occur in the Bible, but does occur in the Book of Mormon. Now, once again, how could Joseph Smith have gotten this ancient phrase right? Nothing in the Bible would have suggested it to him, and yet he uses a term for Jerusalem that we now know was ancient and authentic and did include Bethlehem. Another small thing that's come to light in recent years that I'll just mention in passing, when the Jaredites come to the New World, it takes them almost a year, a very, very long time. And is that plausible? Well, as a matter of fact, it is. The barges that they came in did not have sails because the wind was so terrible. They're simply pushed on as low-lying barges in the water by this tremendous wind, which probably would have destroyed any sails. They were probably brought on by the current, and we know that they came across, or we think that they came across the Pacific Ocean. It's striking that the Pacific current takes 344 days, just about a year, to come from Asia to the coast of Mexico. Did Joseph Smith know that? No. He certainly was unlikely to know that in upstate New York in the late 1820s. We've been speaking of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I might as well throw in another item there. I've alluded to it already. The fact is that when the Book of Mormon came forth, one of the elements of the story that seemed ridiculous was the idea that this was the product of a people who had been destroyed, who had sealed the document up deliberately to come forth in a future time. Did such a story make sense? People thought it didn't. But now with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we know of a community that did exactly that. The Dead Sea Scrolls community on the shores of the Dead Sea at Qumran saw the Roman armies coming toward them. They sealed their documents up in the caves along there by the Dead Sea. They knew that there was a good chance they weren't coming back. They hoped to, but they didn't. They were probably killed at Masada, just a little bit further to the south. So the documents were preserved in the mountainside or in the hillside there at Qumran to come forth only in this century. A precise analogy to the Book of Mormon. There are other analogies there that are worth mentioning. The community seems to have been presided over by a group of 3 priests and a group of 12 laymen underneath them. Now, this is not the first presidency in the Quorum of the 12. I don't want to push that too far, but it seems to me that it's far more than just chance that the organization was arranged in such a fashion. Something else